All right. Hello, everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. My name is Matt Bilotti, and I'm a product lead here at AngelList. For those of you not familiar with AngelList, we build the infrastructure that helps power the startup economy. We focus on providing firms, startups, and investors within private markets the software and services they need to launch and scale a startup or fund and invest in both. We currently support over $16 billion in assets under management and $124 billion in assets on platform. AngelList's unified software suite provides real-time insights and unparalleled efficiency for venture and private equity firms at any stage with any back office provider. We're building the first end-to-end software platform for private markets specifically with the unique demands of venture and private equity in mind. I am really excited today to be joined in this webinar by Garima Grover, VP of Client Services at Galaxy, and I think we'll invite her up on stage here. She's been at Galaxy. Hey, Garima. Garima's been at Galaxy for over 3 years now, worked in many roles in her career across both public and private markets, client services, client management, operations, you name it. If you're unfamiliar with Galaxy, it's a digital asset and blockchain leader providing access to the growing digital economy with over 5.7 billion in assets under management. And Galaxy has been a customer with AngelList for years now for our using our digital subscriptions product, Transact. Garima, hopefully I did justice to your intro here. I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it. Thanks so much, Matt. And so excited to be here and speak about the wonders of onboarding.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's going to be a fun conversation. And before we get started, thank you to everybody that has joined in. A couple just housekeeping things. We'll talk through some high-level themes on investor management, how Galaxy manages a white glove onboarding experience for LPs, learnings they have to share, some processes that they use and ways that they approach it, and some predictions for the direction of investor relations over time. After that conversation, we'll leave about 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, we encourage you to submit it throughout. There's a chat. I think it's in your top navigation bar. So go ahead and feel free to click on that and then post your questions right there, and we'll circle back to them toward the end. And then we're also recording this and be sending it out after the event in case you'd like to rewatch it, or if you want to forward along to any friends or colleagues that might find it interesting. All right, enough there. Garima, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start some pretty high-level questions, and then we'll dig deeper from there. So to start us off, how crucial would you say is the onboarding process in establishing trust and confidence with potential investors?
Yeah, so I mean, I think this is like a great start to this segment, right? A well-executed onboarding process is fundamental in establishing that trust and confidence with potential investors, especially ones that are new and are unfamiliar with your firm. The way I equate this is it's like almost like a first impression. So you're serving as the first detailed interaction that the investor will have with the company. So yes, the investor or prospective investor will, have their chats with the sales team, but the sales team is not only selling the products, but the firm, but mostly the products, right? That's their forte. Where we get to show off our skill set is when we're selling the firm, and that to me is through that onboarding process. It can signal how organized, transparent, and competent your firm is. Additionally, throughout this onboarding process, it's also so crucial because you want to ensure that you're meeting all of the regulatory and legal requirements that are being asked of you in collection of items from an investor. It's reducing that risk of any missteps in onboarding, essentially.
Yeah, it makes sense. The onboarding process is almost, from what you're saying, is an extension of the product experience and the the services that the firm might provide.
Exactly. It's a literal journey from beginning to end.
Yeah. In your experience, what are some common misconceptions that firms encounter during this onboarding process?
I like this question because I think it kind of points out sometimes the things that others are thinking but aren't necessarily abiding by. So, like the one size fits all approach, right? There's going to be some obvious differences in investors when you're onboarding clients. Some of which are the most obvious onshore versus offshore. So, the collection of items you need for US investors versus investors that are outside of the US are going to differ. And so, having to create a process that is standard onboarding is going to be very tough if you're a global firm. Um, the other thing is assuming prior knowledge. So where I come from at Galaxy, crypto has a bunch of different jargon that I learned when I first came to this side of the business 3 years ago. The last thing you want to do is assume that clients know what you're talking about or what you're asking. And so the way that onboarding will be smooth for the client is if you're posing a question in a way that will make sense to people that are sophisticated, people that are unsophisticated, essentially making it so that it's self serving. And then again, not emphasizing compliance enough. So, yes, we all want to onboard clients in an easy way, get them into the firm, keep them happy. But why are we downplaying how important compliance and regulatory information is? This is something in reality where, at least in my opinion, I feel that you're demonstrating a commitment to legal and regulatory standards, which ultimately is, again, leading to that building of trust between your firm and the client.
Yeah, I'll speak from my own experience as an investor. The first time that I invested into a vehicle, I ran into KYC AML requirements, but no one that I had worked with explained it to me, and so I didn't know. I started getting asked all these questions, and it was like, well, why do I need to provide this? And so what you're saying is it's so important, especially if someone is not a super seasoned investor, or if they're new to maybe a family office or a firm. They might not know all the like intricacies of the jargon and all the things that need to be collected up front.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there's no point in downplaying it, right? Ultimately, we're going to have to collect it one way or another. Sometimes it's easier for clients, and they're used to it, and then sometimes there's this level of hand holding that's required.
Yeah, makes sense. Um, let's talk a little bit about like the tactical process of onboarding. What's something that maybe you've changed or updated in your client onboarding process in the last year that has significantly improved the overall investor onboarding process?
Yeah, so I would say making it nearly mandatory to onboard all clients through the electronic platform via AngelList. I swear this isn't a marketing gimmick that I wanted to, insert here. It's genuinely so important because when you're moving away from onboarding clients through emails, as much as I love Outlook, it's very hard to stay organized, especially in a period where you may be in fundraising mode. You're onboarding 50 plus clients. You need something that's going to keep you in check and keep the client in check. Um, Having clients onboard through an electronic platform makes it not only easier for them so that they're not printing out 80-page booklets and then scanning it back in, um, and us trying to decipher, what does that say? Like, I can't understand that person's handwriting, and then having this back and forth dialogue. Um, Having clients go through the electronic platform has been a game changer for us.
Yeah, I know I've talked to many other firms and folks, and I think one of the big things is like if you're doing PDFs back and forth to what you're saying about digitizing it, it's just hard to keep track of like where are things and what threads are the conversations happening in, and so that's awesome to hear.
Yeah,
Uh,
definitely. And I'll just add one more point. I mean, the onboarding process involves three different parties, right? You have the client, you have the manager, and then you have the fund administrator who's ultimately reviewing the docs. And so having a cohesive way to ensure that all three parties are able to see the information, provide the information, ask about any deficiencies. I mean, this process just makes it so much more simpler than, again, having that back and forth through email.
nice. Appreciate the plug there. We did not ask for it. I promise. Um, From your perspective, what's a typical timeline from initial investor interest to funds being wired? And throughout that process, like I think there's a couple maybe specific choke points where a delay might occur, and maybe we talked about a little bit of it with the compliance type requirements. But where do you see most of the delays happening, and what's the general timeline?
Yeah, so I would say it's hard for me to speak from the sales process because that's outside of my realm. But once an investor indicates interest in wanting to, fund into one of the products, at that point, I mean, it's just so dependent on the investor. So if the investor is one where they're trying to time the market, they'll be more keen to provide all of the information as soon as possible, send the wire, get approved, and then ultimately invest. But if you have certain investors that may be feeling a little bit more uncertain and are maybe just not as familiar, or they have their own, reasons to not want to go as fast, it could take anywhere from like a week to a couple of weeks. On average, though, I would say it would probably be from like an investor onboarding to funds wired around a 3 to 5 business day turnaround. And you're absolutely right. I think you hit the nail on the head. Delays occur with the AML KYC information. Asking for generalistic information about an investor is easy. It's when you need to start asking the investor to pull documents like IDs, proof of address. That's where it starts to get a little more cumbersome.
Yeah. And on the point of like, some investors are trying to time the market and move really fast. Some might be going a little bit slower. How do you how do you tease that out? And how do you kind of like, what are ways that you've approached like helping them along faster, right? Because like at the end of the day, you kind of want to close them before, they might change their minds, or they might get lost in, and all the questions and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, so this is where I think having that foundation of trust is so important, between the sales rep who first brought in that client and your client service representative, and having the combination of that team to talk through with the client and understand where the hesitancies lie. Sometimes a client can say things like, "I have to wait for my compliance team to approve because this could be, some sort of jurisdiction that they just need approval for." Or it could simply be a sense of FOMO, like I want to invest, but I'm not sure. And at that point, it's educating the investor on what they're investing in, what the product is, and going from there.
Yeah. Makes sense. How do you like throughout that onboarding process, and I guess especially with the folks that might be a little bit more hesitant, how do you ensure confidentiality and data security throughout that process, especially considering all the sensitive financial information that might be provided, especially if they're a little bit more close to the chest with the the information that they might want to provide and the speed that they want to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is such a great question because of the type of information we're dealing with. We're collecting IDs, we're asking for social security numbers, wiring instructions. I mean, we're asking for highly confidential information. And the last thing you want for any firm is for a data breach to occur, right? This is one thing that Galaxy and I are, we take with a very high regard, is doing the due diligence of your vendors. And I'm sure, you can attest to this, Matt. Like, we had our IT and compliance team conduct due diligence on AngelList. We had them conduct a due diligence on the fund administrator. These are the places where that type of information is going to be hosted. We need to make sure from a fiduciary standpoint that we're comfortable for our clients to provide them with that information so that, there are no breaches in the future. There's no issue. We really do want to ensure that our vendors are meeting the highest standards as it relates to cybersecurity.
Yeah, makes sense. How do you think about so like Galaxy, for example, goes through this due diligence with the
Mhm.
vendors, and you have built your own confidence that the data is secure through any third parties and all that. How do you then make sure that that trust is communicated and transferred to the investor throughout that process? If they might have questions, or like I guess how do you make sure that they know that you've done all this heavy lifting?
So some clients are more understanding, and they they'll just go about the process, right? Other clients are very particular. They'll want to know each and everything. And from that standpoint, I mean, we, even during like the sales process, we'll make it a point to note that we do conduct extreme due diligence for each and every single one of our vendors. It could be the smallest of vendor, but we need to ensure that wherever we're hosting someone's data, that it's going to be in a secure format. How we do it, I mean, this is like straight communication with the client, getting them comfortable and again, just building that foundation of trust.
Yeah. And one theme that I'm kind of teasing out from the conversation here is that the onboarding also starts well before any documents start being sent back and forth, right? You've mentioned the sales process and alignment in that sales process. It's really important for, that to be
Mhm.
communicated. And then also for any concerns that the salesperson may have teased out from the investor, that gets passed over during the actual like closing and document and information sharing process.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. There needs to be a sense of communication and alignment between the various teams, the investment team, the sales team, compliance, and of course client services. It's important that we're understanding what the concerns are, and we take feedback from investors very seriously. We want to ensure that we're doing the best we can. In this type of industry, especially something as nascent as crypto, trust is key. Like that is the big theme here.
Yeah, makes sense. So I'm gonna ask a couple AngelList specific questions, and I know we already
Okay.
touched on it, and then we'll dive into some more compliance specific type things
Mhm.
during the onboarding process. How has AngelList Transact changed the onboarding experience for your investors and internally for your team?
Um, Look, I'll say it. It's been a game changer, right? We went from a completely archaic method of collecting documentation to something that is incredibly streamlined for the three parties involved: the client, the administrator, and the manager. Um, Without like having something that connects the three of us, that's outside of an email inbox. I mean, like I said, we're in fundraising mode right now, and it would have been impossible for me and my team to get through the X amount of investors with ease. AngelList, I love the fact that it has such a filterable feature. We can print out reports. We can download things, different data sets of information. That just makes the onboarding process so much more streamlined and easier, not only for us but also for the client.
Makes sense. And was there any sort of specific like wow moment using AngelList Transact that surprised you the most?
Yeah. So, the fact that you can see where a client is in their subscription process is just so vital, because before this, you're picking up the phone and saying, "Hey, client A, how far along did you get in the docs? Where can we assist you?" It's that point where you're bothering the client constantly to try and get the documentation. Whereas now, I can go onto my fund manager portal and look at exactly where a client is at, where they might be struggling, where I'm foreseeing some sort of issue occurring. And that's, I think, the wow factor. That's what really makes this process so much easier for us, because of the transparency that AngelList provides.
Makes sense. It's almost like you order a pizza from some random pizza shop. You don't know where it is and if it's being made yet, but you order with Domino's and you get a whole exact like, here's where it is. It's in the oven. Um,
That's exactly right. Yeah, you can track every little movement of that driver to get that pizza.
yeah. All right. Away from pizza before I get too hungry. What measures, more on the compliance side, what measures do you take to ensure regulatory compliance throughout the onboarding journey, right? We've touched on how important and critical it is. There's the trust pieces, but how do you make sure that you actually like are meeting the compliance bars that are necessary?
Yeah, so I mean, probably the first and most obvious step is ensuring that we as a firm understand what the regulatory requirements are, and making sure that we're constantly keeping ourselves up to date with the ever-changing regulatory landscape. Especially in something nascent as crypto, I mean, things are constantly on the move. Um, you know, as it relates to onboarding, specifically understanding anti-money laundering laws, KYC requirements, and data protection regulations. That would probably be the first step. The second step would be implementation of these regulations and requirements. That means working with your fund admin to ensure that, they're collecting the information our books are requiring us to collect because of the regulatory requirements in place. The third would be, and also probably an obvious one, is just educating our team. So yes, compliance is responsible for ensuring our firm remains compliant, but it's on us as part of the firm and as part of the face of the firm on a client service standpoint to ensure that we're not letting any bad player infiltrate the system, infiltrate the funds. These are commingled funds with different LPs. The last thing you need is someone that was, I don't know, in jail and you just didn't even realize. That's reputational damage and something that's just not needed. So having that robust compliance process means working with the fund admin, working with your compliance team, and ensuring that we're getting what we need.
Yeah. And what are some of the maybe common challenges that firms or Galaxy might face during the onboarding process related to subscription documents, compliance checks, all that?
So I think where clients and firms really struggle is when the process is super lengthy and complex. We're asking questions that the client just isn't understanding. We're receiving incomplete information and then having that back and forth with the client who's already feeling this sense of frustration. At that point, so yes, everything is electronic at this moment, but we have to remember there's still a human element to onboarding that requires the client service team or your investor relations team to provide some level of handholding so that the investor doesn't feel like they're just alone in this process, that they're, just trying to face off with a computer. They need to understand that they're facing off with a firm that is, trying to do the same thing they are, onboard the client and keep them happy.
Yeah, right. At the end of the day, they're investing in a firm and the people behind it and the decisions those people make. And the last thing you want is for them to no longer feel like there's people, backing them through the actual onboarding there.
Right, exactly.
How do you balance the need for thorough due diligence with the desire to expedite the onboarding process for investors, especially ones, and I'd imagine particularly in crypto where prices move quickly and there's sometimes the feeling of I have to get in right now. How do you balance that, all the due diligence necessary for the desire of those people that just want to move really fast?
Yeah, so I'll equate this basically to a seesaw where you have the client on one side, the manager in the middle, and then your fund administrator on the other side. And essentially it's the fund manager's responsibility to provide that equilibrium between the two parties. We're acting as the middle party here. The client provides the information, the fund administrator reviews. Once we get that, in good order, only then can we move forward with the investment. This means that the manager will have to provide a certain sense of urgency to both the client and to the admin. So if the client is trying to time the market and you want to help them, well, then that means that the client's going to have to provide the information that they're missing. So that means working with them, helping them understand what exactly is needed, understanding what might be a gating item versus a non-gating item, perhaps something we can collect after onboarding. But just making sure that we're keeping that investor happy. And then on the opposite side of that is having that, rapport with your fund administrator to ensure that they understand when there's an urgent situation that, they kind of need to reprioritize a little bit. That's the only way I see that, there won't be a misstep in collection of information, and having to reach out to the investor after the fact is always a big no-no. So you want to make sure that everything is done up front.
Yeah, makes sense. And as mentioned at the start when I introed you, you've had a career going through working in the private markets and public markets, and through all that journey, working all these different places and seeing technology evolve around the tooling and the platforms. We've talked a bit about how the technology and tools have helped the GP side, like the fund manager side. Mm-hmm. How has it evolved to help the investor side?
So I would say it's the fact of the automation, right? And just like workflow management in general, the way in which we're collecting the information is allowing for minimal errors. We're getting exactly what we need to a certain extent, and overall, it's just speeding up the process. Um, that's kind of why, like, the AngelList platform, just having the ability to connect with all three parties is so key, because as soon as a client submits their documentation, like, we as a fund manager will get the notification, but so will the fund administrator. So that review can almost start instantaneously and really just prevents any sort of delay.
Yeah, makes sense. I've got a handful of more questions here, and then we'll go ahead and shift over to any Q&A that's gotten submitted. Next question here, looking ahead, what are some trends or advancements you foresee shaping the future of investor onboarding and investor relations in, private equity or other markets? So, we've talked about how the technology has helped so far. What are things that you see continuing to evolve or continuing to grow in terms of the technology making the onboarding easier and faster and better for everyone?
So it's a little tough to say, but I think trends will be basically dependent on technological innovation, right? How will AngelList, further make it easier for clients and the manager, from an onboarding perspective? The regulatory changes, and that landscape in general, like, are there going to be further, requirements we're going to have to include? Probably. And then just like evolution of the investors' expectations. It could mean further automation. It could even mean maybe AI integration, like AI could analyze, investor data and perhaps provide a more custom tailored, investor onboarding experience depending on the responses. But that's kind of how I'm seeing the future of this movement.
Yeah, some helpful product ideas in there for me. When you think about the role that communication plays, we've touched on this a bit. Especially for investors that might not understand the depth of compliance or regulatory needs, or they might want to move super fast, or they, like, for whatever reason, I'm sure you deal with this all the time, like, timelines change, whether it's on the investor side or it's on the fund side. For whatever reason, there's all these edge cases that appear. What role do you see communication playing, and what are some ways that, like, you and Galaxy or other firms you've seen, like how do they approach the communication in those, like, tense or stressful moments where timelines are kind of like moving around?
So I would say inevitably there could always be delays or issues that arise, but it's all about managing the investor's expectations at that point, right? They might have a very specific timeline, but if there's some issue that occurred and it may inevitably delay that client from investing, we have to be at the forefront of that. We have to have that dialogue with the client. I'll say it again, like I said earlier in this video, is trust is everything in this business. And so without that sense of trust, that relationship is just never going to build. So in my opinion, I feel having successful relationships with our clients is what keeps us going. And it also just helps, again, build that rapport in our investment community. At the beginning of when Galaxy first started, this was a very word of mouth business. Obviously we've grown massively since then. But before that, it's just so important to build that sense of belonging and trust with your clients so that they feel comfortable enough to, invest with you, even with those inevitable delays.
Yeah. So one more question here, and then we'll take a look at some of the Q&A that's been submitted. So onboarding ends, all the documents are signed, the money is wired. How can you talk a little bit about how the role of that onboarding process plays into the moment after the close, in terms of, like, investor engagement, loyalty, maybe potential investment from that investor from that point forward? Because we've talked about onboarding. There's the early onboarding before the onboarding actually happens. There's the onboarding here. What about the space after the onboarding?
Yeah. So I would say for this, I mean, one, just fostering that loyalty, being excited for the fact that the client, has invested, has entrusted you with their money, and showing them that, right? The last thing you want is just to be robotic and just say, "Cool, thanks for joining." No, make them feel as happy and excited as you are, so that they continue to feel that this was the right move, right? This was the right way to go. This was the firm I wanted to connect with. I think personally, post onboarding, you have to have regular updates with your clients. That could be in the format of, newsletters, webinars, events, just to make that client feel connected to their investment, and not just something that they've put their money in that now it's going to be like a hodl situation where they're just going to hold and then they'll sell when they're ready. You want them to feel connected, to feel interested, so that at some point, perhaps even as our product continues its evolution, there's a chance to potentially cross sell if that investor sees that investment fit in their portfolio. So I would say that continuation of trust and fostering of like the loyalty of being with Galaxy or being with your firm.
Awesome. Thanks for talking through all this. It's been a great discussion so far. So we'll spend the rest of the time here doing Q&A. For
Sure.
anyone that it looks like we've had some submitted questions, but for anyone that hasn't submitted questions, if you do have any that you want to still submit while we keep going here, feel free to go ahead and put those in the chat. So one question that came in, how do you handle discrepancies or missing information in subscription documents, and what steps are taken to ensure this doesn't slow down the onboarding process? And maybe the question there is like a little more tactical, like what do you, when you see, right, like Garima, you're getting the doc, you see that there's something wrong and there's something missing, like what do you do?
Yeah, so it's always a pain in the butt for us as the manager to have to be like, hey, investor A, we're missing X, Y, and Z. Look, it's again about communication. 9 times out of 10, it's probably some sort of like AML KYC document that's missing, just because the investor didn't know, or it could even be something like an accredited investor letter that's needed, and that has to be signed by an eligible third party. And at that point, it gets to be more of a cumbersome process for the client. So it's tough to get around like how best to handle it, because I think every situation is going to kind of be unique in its own way. But on average, I would say work directly with the investor, outside of that electronic onboarding platform, like move into it more of like a human element so that the client feels connected and you can provide the kind of assistance that they need to move forward in the process.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. Next question. How does your onboarding process change for different investors? Maybe based on if they've invested with you already or are investing significantly higher amount than others. Like what tactically changes across the different investor groups?
So I would say that it goes one of two ways, right? For existing investors, at least. If the client has previously submitted their subscription through AngelList, well, guess what? AngelList makes it so easy for someone to submit a second document for a different investment, because they have this like almost like a copy paste feature that just makes it entirely seamless for the client. And all they have to simply do is confirm that there's no changes to the information and sign. That's one way. The second way is if the client did not use AngelList previously, but is an existing client, we'll send them like a short 2-pager just to, ensure that there's no changes to their information, and then complete the subscription process that way. That way we're still utilizing what's on file, but we're trying to make it as easy as possible. The last thing you want is for a client to feel like, well, I've already given you everything I need. Like, why are you asking this information again? I just want to send my money, just invest my money. Well, we still need to collect certain things that might be outdated. But yeah, we're going to try to make it as easy as possible so the client doesn't stray away from this potential opportunity.
Yeah, makes sense. I think at the end of the day, and you've talked about this a little bit, there's a lot of human element here in the investor and onboarding process, right? And managing those emotions and making sure that everyone's really clear on, this is what you have to do, and this is how it's going to be different or easier or better or whatever it is. That's certainly an important piece of it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Another question we have here is, what are some questions that your compliance team asked AngelList to get comfortable with AngelList protection of investor data?
So this was, like, I will say, a combination of compliance as well as our IT security. So the lead of our security team had these conversations, ensuring, like, how is AngelList back program protected? Like, what system are you guys using that's hosting your data? Is that through a different third party? Is it something that's more proprietary? This it's important to note that compliance, like, in terms of investor protection, is really on the side of that. What they're looking for is, like, the side of, are you following the regulatory requirements that need to be met, such as, do you guys have functionality to provide suitability forms so that we can ensure that the client is eligible to invest? I would say it's more so IT's job to ensure that AngelList or whatever vendor you use is what systems they have to protect investor data.
Yeah, makes sense. And for anyone that is interested in chatting with us at the end, I'll say a couple notes on how you can learn more. Another question: do you upload data into a CRM and or investor portal?
So we have both. So we do use CRM. We utilize Salesforce here. And then for the investor portal, that's actually through our fund administrator. So they have their own investor portal that, again, we've due diligence to ensure that they're meeting the requirements to protect everything. But yeah, we do utilize both.
Awesome. Looks like there's a question for me here. I'll answer it quick. Does the platform handle US and non-US clients, high net worth institutions, family offices? Yes, 100%. It's a fully flexible platform to handle any type of investor, any type of subscription document, additions, redemptions, transfers, all that fun stuff. All of it could be worked out with any type of investor. Another question we have here is, what do you do if a client flat out refuses to use the services to complete the subscription process?
Yeah, so we do have some clients that may just feel uncomfortable doing things electronically. It could just be very well because maybe they're not as comfortable using a computer. At that point, I mean, we give them two options, right? We can provide you with an Adobe PDF that's editable, and then we'll have to send you, signatures through DocuSign. Or the second way is, again, that super archaic method of having to print out the booklet and then handwrite and have the investor scan it back in.
Yeah, it's always the fun one, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's hard, right? You want everyone to use this electronic method, but you have to be able to, again, tailor the process so that it makes it comfortable for everyone.
Yeah. And one quick note on the AngelList side, even if a close happens offline in that sort of way, you can still upload it and manage that system of record across the rest of transactions as well with an AngelList. Another question we have here, in your mind, what does a great investor experience look like?
So this one's simple. I like this question. It's one where the client has limited questions, not because I don't want to answer questions, but because that means that the process worked. When you have an onboarding where there's, like, very limited back and forth between yourself and the client and the fund administrator, the client is able to just get through the process and sign the docs. That means that it worked, and it worked well. So that's what I would say to that question.
Simple answer. It's generally simple. If it's simple, it's a good experience.
Exactly.
Another question here around Galaxy's approach. What level of flexibility do you offer investors in terms of subscription options and payment methods? And how does this impact the onboarding process?
So it depends on what flexibility is needed in the situation, right? There's only so much flexibility we can do. If the flexibility is, I don't want to submit my AML documents because I don't have them, well, there's no real flexibility around that. That's
Right.
something we have to collect. But if it's like payment methods, I mean, I guess it just depends. Like, do they want a wire? Do they want an ACH? We have different payment methods, so we can also work around that. So yeah, I would say that this one is really just dependent on the flexibility need.
Yeah. Looks like we got a couple more here and just another call out. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to toss them in. Could you share any best practices or innovative approaches for expediting the subscription process review and approval process?
So I would say, and this is something I said before, but being that bridge between the client and the administrator, having a solid relationship with both so that when the administrator is ultimately reviewing things, they might have a more stringent process where they're requiring, really, really tough things that sometimes just gets complicated. How do we make it easier for the client? Let's work together so that we're still getting what we need, but we're not overly complicating the ask, providing that sense of urgency.
Makes sense. A question for me, I'll answer real quick. Does the Transact product have the ability to countersign subscription agreements by the fund manager after review? Yes, we fully support countersignatures. The process also enables LPs to invite authorized signatories or joint, right? If there's additional signatures necessary, we integrate directly with DocuSign. And so there's full counter signature processes there, and then everyone gets the documents once they're countersigned. One other looks like we have two more, unless the third one comes in. Could you share any experiences or examples where effective processes and communication practices have contributed to long-term investor satisfaction and retention, and I'll add potentially additional investment into the firm?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is about providing transparency to the client, especially in times of crisis. So, the perfect example was last year when, regional banks were collapsing one by one. I mean, what's going on, right? Like every investor was super concerned about their investment, their money, what's happening. At that point, it's our fiduciary duty to ensure that we've taken all of the appropriate measures to ensure that we don't. It's going to be a non-event for the client, and that's exactly what we did, right? I don't believe in over communication because I almost feel like sometimes that leads to more questions, less answers. But you have to provide a sense of like comfort to the client so that they understand that we're aware of the situation, we're working through it, we've taken the necessary steps, and your assets are completely safe. That's the level of communication and again rapport that's required to maintain that relationship.
Yep, makes sense. Another question: what strategies do you employ to ensure that the onboarding process is not only efficient but also provides a positive experience for investors?
Yeah. So, I'll always start out when a client or a prospective investor is interested in subscribing is I'll send them that initial email saying, welcome, here's the link to our electronic platform, AngelList. It doesn't stop there. The client is going to go through their process, but you have to provide that human element because at the end of the day, look, it's still paperwork. Who really wants to get through paperwork? It's mundane. You got to keep the investor excited. And the only way to do that is by providing that human element, letting them know that you're there for them at any point, phone, Zoom, email, etc.
Makes sense. All comes back to the human element. We are dealing
Exactly.
with digitized stuff, documents, PDFs, all that. But at the end of the day, it's humans investing in other humans. And so being human along the way is a critical component of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. It looks like it's a wrap on the submitted questions. Thank you again, Garima, for joining us.
Of course.
Really, really appreciate it. And a big thank you to those of you that tuned in as well for the conversation. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day. As mentioned, we'll go ahead and send the recording afterwards in case you want to rewatch or share. And then I also want to point you all to there's a poll section in the chat if you haven't been there already, where you can answer a quick question to let us know if you're interested in learning more about the AngelList Investor Management Suite. I know there were a couple questions in the chat, so for those folks that might want to learn more, feel free to click on that poll section and answer that there. And then, as mentioned, we'll be following up in the coming days with a recording of the event. Garima, thank you again. Very, very much appreciate it. It's a wonderful conversation. I learned a lot. We've been working with you as a customer for a while, and I got to learn even more about your process and approach. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you again so much for having me. This was great.
All right. Have a good one, everyone. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.